Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a quiet beachside retreat turns into ground zero for a ruthless HOA takeover, one man must use his forensic skills, hidden cameras, and iron will to fight back against forged documents, break-ins, and a suburban empire built on lies. This isn't just property, it's war. I'd been living in my beach cottage for just under 8 months when she showed up. It was a quiet Saturday morning. I had just finished my second cup of black coffee and was halfway through patching up the trim on the deck when I heard a polite knock, too polite, on the front door. When I opened it, she was standing there like she owned the place. Power stance, clipboard in hand, hair sprayed into immobility, a smile like a loaded trap. "Mr. Mason?" she asked, though I could tell she already knew. "Karen Bates. I'm the newly elected president of the Shoreview Haven HOA. I wiped my hands on a rag and nodded cautiously. "What can I do for you?" She stepped forward, uninvited, and handed me a glossy folder. Inside was some kind of event schedule. Printed in bold font across the top, Regional HOA Summit, Shoreview Haven Chapter. "We're hosting a coastal summit next weekend," she began, her voice like a kindergarten teacher trying to explain fractions. "Council representatives, development planners, zoning consultants, the whole crew. We're expecting 30 or 40 guests." I nodded, still not sure why I was being looped into this. My cottage wasn't part of Shoreview Haven. I made damn sure of that when I bought the place. No covenants, no bylaws, no dues. Just me, the ocean, and enough space to keep people like Karen comfortably far away. She continued with practiced brightness. "Your property is ideally located. It's right between the boardwalk and the private marina. We were wondering if, just for the weekend, you'd be willing to let the HOA use the cottage to host a few guests." I stared at her. "You want the keys to my house?" "Just for the weekend," she chirped. "Everything will be professionally cleaned before and after. You wouldn't even know we were here." I laughed. I actually laughed. "Miss Bates, I don't rent out my home. It's not a short-term vacation property. It's where I live." Her smile faltered just a hair. "Of course, I understand. But think of it as a community contribution. A gesture of goodwill." I leaned against the doorframe. "I'm not a member of your community. I'm not in your HOA. This is private property." A flicker of something passed over her face, tight and brief, like a muscle twitch. Then the smile returned. "Well, I hope you'll reconsider. We're trying to create harmony along the coast. Visual consistency, cooperation. I'd hate to think one holdout might throw off the whole initiative." There it was, not even 5 minutes in, and she was already hinting at problems. I didn't bite. "Thanks, but the answer's no," I said, then stepped back and closed the door, politely but firmly. The next day, I found footprints in the sand outside the rear entrance, a single set, not mine. They came up from the shoreline, walked the narrow side path beside the house, and stopped at the back door. No broken lock, no sign of damage. Just a single pair of impressions in the wet sand, and one partial tread mark that looked like it belonged to a low-end loafer. It could have been a beach walker, but my gut didn't like coincidences. That night, I installed a trail camera above the rear patio light. It was motion-triggered and infrared. Cheap, simple, effective. I'd used the same model when helping insurance agents investigate arson claims. This time, I wasn't doing it for work. I was doing it because something about Karen's smile hadn't left my mind since she turned around and walked down my steps. Monday morning, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name typed on the envelope. Inside was a printed flyer on HOA letterhead, thanking all regional property stakeholders for their support during the upcoming summit. My name was listed along with my address under a bold heading, "Confirmed Participating Properties." I read it twice. Then I read it again. I hadn't agreed to anything. I called the number on the flyer. No answer. Left a message. No reply. The sun was setting as I walked out back to check the sand. This time, there were 2 sets of prints. One set approached the same back door. The second set circled around the cottage and disappeared near the dunes. I felt my stomach tighten. Something told me the summit was just an excuse. A front for something else. Something they didn't want to ask permission for. And that was the last time I left the back door unmonitored. By Wednesday, the camera paid for itself. At 2:17 in the morning, the motion alert pinged my phone. I was awake. Bad habit from the old days working crime scenes on swing shifts, and I checked the feed instantly. The grainy black and white footage showed a figure approaching the back entrance, not a burglar's cautious creep. No, this was someone who thought they belonged there. He was slow, scanning the lock, holding something in his hand. A pick? Number? A key? A key that didn't fit. He tried twice, then pulled something from his pocket, maybe a bump key or jiggle tool, and started working the latch. He wore a dark jacket with a reflective logo on the back. It was hard to make out in the IR glare, but I could make out the outline of the letters, HOA. Then another figure moved in the shadows behind him. Female, slighter frame. The camera caught just a sliver of her face when she turned toward the water. Blonde hair tied tight, head constantly swiveling like she was watching for cars. I didn't need a facial recognition program to know who it was. Karen had come herself. They gave up after maybe 2 minutes and disappeared into the dune mist, but I'd seen enough. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I wanted them to feel safe. Let them try again. The next morning, I got to work. I replaced the deadbolt entirely, this time with a tamper sensor wired to a wireless siren stashed inside the hallway cabinet. I also installed 2 new hidden cameras, one inside the hallway light fixture and one pointed at the entryway from the bookshelf, both triggered by motion. I knew how to hide cameras. Thieves never looked up, and HOA presidents were no exception. That evening, I received another envelope, this one hand-delivered. It was tucked between the screen door and the frame, sealed with a sticker bearing the Shoreview Haven logo. Inside, a 1-page participation confirmation notice. My cottage, according to the document, was now officially designated as overflow guest housing for Shoreview Haven Summit delegates per verbal agreement. Verbal agreement, my ass. And at the bottom, there it was, my name followed by a signature I didn't recognize. Except, I did. It was my signature, or rather a copy of it. A sloppy replication from an old document I'd signed during an insurance consultation years ago. They'd lifted it, traced it, printed it, and passed it off as real. I didn't just get angry, I got methodical. I scanned the paper, flagged the metadata, took photographs of the envelope for fingerprints. I called an old contact at the local DA's office, not to file a report, but to ask a hypothetical. If a property owner's signature were forged for unauthorized use of real estate, what would that fall under? He answered without hesitating. Forgery. Possibly fraud. Maybe attempted theft of services or criminal trespass, depending on intent, even if they don't physically enter the property. Intent's everything, he said. Why? No reason, I lied. Thursday morning passed without incident. No strange footprints, no HOA men in reflective vests casing the shrubs. But I knew they weren't done. Karen didn't seem like the type to quit on the first failed entry. That night, I sat up reading until well past midnight, waiting. Nothing happened. By 1:30, I was ready to call it and head to bed. Then, at 1:56, the siren screamed. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. I rushed to the control panel, shut it off, and immediately checked the hallway feed. They were inside. The same man, definitely the same jacket, was in the hallway, his face pale in the infrared. Karen followed behind him, holding the damn verbal agreement print out like it was a subpoena. She wasn't even wearing gloves. She turned toward the bookshelf camera just as the system tagged a facial match from earlier. Clear as day. They panicked when the siren hit. You could see it in the way Karen grabbed the man's arm and bolted for the door. They slammed it behind them and vanished into the night like raccoons who'd just been caught in the trash. I didn't chase them. I didn't call anyone. Instead, I sat down, backed up all the video to 2 drives, and pulled out a legal pad. Time to draft my own kind of paperwork. By 9 the next morning, the cops were already there, but not because I called them. A pair of black and white patrol SUVs pulled up onto the gravel shoulder out front, and to my surprise, they weren't responding to my intrusion report. No, according to the officer who knocked, Sergeant Linares, I was being named in an incident report involving unauthorized use of force and potential entrapment. Behind him, standing with a neck brace and a clipboard, was none other than Karen Bates. I stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed, trying not to let my face show how stunned I was. Karen looked like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. Stiff posture, fake bruising makeup around her cheekbone, even a slight limp for dramatic effect. She held up her clipboard and addressed the officers like I wasn't even there. "I'm here to give my formal statement," she said. "I was invited by Mr. Mason to preview his home for official use. Instead, I was assaulted by an illegal security trap and humiliated in front of a colleague." The younger officer beside Linares looked unsure. So you're saying you had permission to be on the property? Absolutely, she replied smoothly. He offered use of the cottage earlier this week. We have it in writing. I could feel my molars grinding. You mean the forged document? Karen didn't even flinch. It's his signature. It's our agreement. Sergeant Linares turned to me. Sir, do you have any evidence contradicting that? I let the silence hang for just a second before answering. Come inside. I'll show you everything. I led them into the cottage, still faintly smelling of Karen's cheap perfume and HOA arrogance. I pulled up the footage on the main monitor in my office and played the scene. The entry, the attempted use of the old key, the false document in Karen's hand, the moment the siren triggered, and their panicked flight. Then I switched feeds to an earlier date and showed the original nighttime attempt, Karen lurking in the shadows while her flunky tried the lock. Next came the footage of me installing the new deadbolt, including time-stamped receipts and camera angles proving the lock had changed. Finally, I brought out the physical letter claiming my verbal agreement, alongside a notarized copy of the original signature it was copied from, clear as day, taken from a form I'd signed 5 years ago during a contractor licensing renewal. The difference was easy to see once side by side. Wrong slant, wrong pen pressure, mismatched stroke. I looked over at Karen. Still sticking with your story? Her face had gone rigid, but she nodded with conviction. He lured us in. That siren was designed to startle, to cause injury. I didn't know the key had changed. It worked before that one slip made both officers glance at each other. Sergeant Linares turned to her. So, you admit you've used the key before? Karen blinked, caught. I assumed it was the same. You assumed? I interrupted, walking over to the file box and pulling out a single sheet. Here's the locksmith invoice, dated 2 days ago. And here's the security sensor installation permit. You triggered a legal alarm system during an unauthorized entry, Karen. The sergeant sighed. Ma'am, we'll need you to step outside for questioning. And Joel? I asked, leaning against the desk. You'll want to talk to him too. He's the one who forced the door. Sergeant Linares gave a small nod. Already in custody. Called in sick this morning. We picked him up at his apartment. He's being questioned separately. Karen's expression cracked just a little at that. I could see the flicker of panic behind the stage makeup. She hadn't expected Joel to be caught so soon. Maybe she thought he'd keep quiet. Maybe she promised him something. The officers took her out to the SUV without cuffs, but I could tell Linares didn't like being manipulated. He gave me a card before he left. If you decide to file charges, call this number. We'll process it. I stood alone in my living room, staring at the spot where Karen had stood, holding forged documents like a flag. I wasn't sure if I was more angry or impressed by her sheer nerve, but I wasn't done. By noon, I was at my lawyer's office. Carol Brandt, sharp as a tack, former fraud prosecutor, now specializing in real estate litigation. I handed her the packet, footage, timeline, documents, forgeries, and a drive with everything backed up. She flipped through it all like a chef studying the ingredients for a perfect roast. This is organized criminal trespass, she said. They accessed your property using a copied key, entered with intent, and tried to back it up with forged consent. That's not a misunderstanding. That's an operation. I nodded. And I want to file suit for every inch of it. She smiled. Then let's bury them. Carol didn't waste time. By the end of the day, she had already submitted a formal cease and desist letter to the Shoreview Haven HOA and filed a criminal complaint with the county DA's office. I was CC'd on everything. Clean language, heavy implications. Words like premeditated, fraudulent misrepresentation, and criminal conspiracy to misappropriate private property stood out like bold red flags on legal letterhead. While Carol dug into the legal meat, I handled the forensic angles. Old habits. I started with the forged letter Karen had left at my door, the one claiming a verbal agreement to use the cottage. The signature was, without a doubt, a cut-and-paste job. Sloppy, too. The angle was wrong. The ink looked digitally rendered, and when I adjusted the exposure levels, I found compression artifacts around the signature that weren't present in the rest of the document. Someone had scanned an old signed form of mine, chopped out the signature, and slapped it onto a new page like a ransom note. Even better, I knew exactly which document they stole it from. Back when I worked as an insurance consultant, I'd signed a general liability agreement for a property walkthrough with Shoreview Haven's prior management. That was 4 years ago. The file was digital, stored in a client-accessible Dropbox. And guess who took over that account after the management shuffle? Karen Bates. Carol's eyes lit up when I told her. That's chain of custody gold. If you can show she had access to the original signature, we can prove intent. So we got a subpoena for Shoreview Haven's internal email records. Took a few days, but it was worth the wait. One thread stood out like a neon sign. Karen had emailed a copy of my old insurance form to the HOA's event coordinator with the note, "See attached, signature useful for consent doc. Make it look clean." It was over. They were done. But Karen hadn't stopped digging. While we waited for the DA to finish processing the charges, I got a call from a contact at the county recorder's office, a man named Evan. We'd worked a case together years back, shady boundary dispute involving a vineyard and a fake water easement. He sounded tense. "Garrett, you may want to come in," he said. "There's a zoning correction request on your parcel. Filed last week. HOA flag on it." My spine straightened. "What kind of correction?" "Temporary boundary expansion. Claims your southern dune line was improperly drawn during a legacy survey in 2003. Request is to include it under Shoreview Haven's managed coastal zone." I nearly dropped the phone. That dune was my only direct beach access point, and the entire reason I bought the place. Evan sent me the form. Sure enough, it bore a notarized amendment application with digital approval from Karen Bates, acting as Shoreview president. The date on the form, 3 days before the break-in. It was a coordinated move. First, get into the house, either to stage the agreement or plant further documentation. Then move to have the boundary amended to claim jurisdiction. If no one contested it in 30 days, the county would register the zoning adjustment by default. It was a hostile annexation, dressed in paper. I drove straight to Carol's office and dumped everything on her desk. She scanned it all in silence. "This isn't just HOA overreach," she finally said. "This is real estate fraud. If we prove she knowingly altered zoning data to include your property, that's a felony." "And if she's done this before?" I asked. Carol looked up. "Then we're not dealing with one bad actor. We're looking at systemic abuse." We filed a motion with the county to freeze the zoning change and initiate an audit of Shoreview Haven's recent amendment requests. It triggered an internal review of their past 10 submissions. By the end of the week, the results came in. 3 other properties along the coast had nearly identical corrections. One of them belonged to a retired widow named Susan Burke, whose garden had recently been confiscated by the HOA for being non-compliant with landscape standards. Another owner had reported a mysterious increase in HOA fees, despite having no record of ever joining. Carol's tone changed after that. "This isn't about just you anymore," she said. "Karen's built a quiet little empire out here, and now it's unraveling." We filed to escalate the case into civil court and submitted all findings to the state attorney general's office. The fraud, the break-in, the forged signature, the zoning scam, it was all part of a pattern. Karen hadn't just crossed a line. She'd bulldozed it, paved it over, and tried to plant a flag. I always thought that if I ever went back to war, it would be with something bigger than a clipboard. But here I was, fighting off a hostile takeover, one parcel at a time, and the enemy wore beige slacks and HOA badges instead of fatigues. The more we dug, the uglier it got. Carol compiled a list of every property adjacent to Shoreview Haven that had received zoning clarification notices in the last 2 years. 9 of them. 3 owners were elderly. 2 didn't live full-time on the property. At least 1 had passed away, and the HOA had attempted to claim jurisdiction during the probate process. It was deliberate, coordinated, like a reverse land grab dressed in polite emails and community alignment memos. I took a ride out to meet one of the victims, Susan Burke. Her place was just a few lots down the coast, modest, well-kept, with a small trellis garden full of lavender and herbs that had apparently offended the aesthetic standards of Shoreview. Karen had tried to fine her for non-compliance, even though Susan had no HOA affiliation and her deed was ironclad. "I thought I was losing my mind," Susan told me, clutching a stack of warning letters. "They said I'd signed the petition to join them. I never signed anything." Then a landscaper showed up with orders to tear out the garden. She'd fought them, alone, called the county twice. No one followed up. Now her garden was half dead, and the HOA had placed a small stone path through it, claiming shared pedestrian access. I took pictures, documented it all. This was no longer about my cottage. This was predatory governance. Back at home, I started reviewing the footage again, this time focusing on the first break-in attempt. That's when I caught something I'd missed before. In the original grainy night shot, just before Joel steps toward the lock, Karen turns and whispers something. I boosted the audio. Hard to make out, but she says something about checking the layout and installing the binder. Binder? I searched the house, top to bottom, closets, crawl space, attic, and then I found it. Tucked behind the books in the back office shelf, neatly slipped between two old paperbacks, was a laminated binder, HOA branded. Inside, floor plans of my cottage, printed schedules for the summit weekend, a guest staging chart with names and sleeping assignments, and a page titled Property Transition Plan. My name wasn't on it. Instead, it listed Transfer to Shoreview Haven Oversight, per Section 7A, Interim Compliance. At the bottom was a faux signature block with a printed version of my name, no actual signature. The plan projected rental income, target guests, and even an internal memo referencing a partnership investor. I handed the whole thing to Carol. She read through it in silence, then picked up the phone and called a contact at the State Real Estate Licensing Board. An hour later, we had a name. Henry Lehman, coastal property investor, known for specializing in underutilized private holdings along Oregon's coastline, had previously worked with at least 2 communities that had aggressively expanded their HOA zones before transferring rental rights to his firm. And here's the kicker. Carol pulled real estate filings and found that Henry had recently submitted a short-term rental license request to the city for my address. Pending approval, application dated 2 weeks ago, she called him, put him on speaker. She introduced herself as my attorney, asked what exactly his interest was in my property. I was told the cottage would be available for summer overflow housing, he said casually. We were under the impression it was transitioning into HOA managed use. I have a provisional contract signed by Karen Bates and the community board I cut in. And did you ever talk to the actual owner? Long pause. I was told the owner had consented. I didn't look into it personally, Carol stepped in. Mr. Lehman, you've filed a permit for a property you don't own, under a lease you don't hold, based on fraudulent documentation. I suggest you withdraw your application immediately, or prepare to be named in a civil conspiracy case. He withdrew it within the hour. By now, Shoreview Haven's board was in chaos. Word had gotten out. Between the cease and desist letters, the zoning freeze, the binder, and now the investor fallout, residents were starting to question their fearless leader. Some of them reached out to me directly. I'm sorry, one email said. We didn't know she was going this far, but Karen wasn't retreating. The next morning, I opened my front door to find a new flyer, professional print quality, slipped into every mailbox along the road. Support Shoreview's unified vision, it read. One shoreline, one community. Below it, a manipulated photo of my house with the HOA logo superimposed on the mailbox. They weren't just trespassing now. They were trying to rewrite the truth. I knew the flyer wasn't just for me. It was a warning to the neighborhood. A kind of HOA propaganda. Bright colors, warm language, carefully chosen buzzwords like coastal harmony and regional integrity. But buried in the copy was something more troubling. A phrase I recognized from a previous zoning proposal, Shoreline Integration Model, Phase 1. I ran it through the county archives. The term had appeared in a long-forgotten planning submission by Shoreview Haven almost a year earlier. It had been rejected for overreach. They tried to include several private lots under a regional beautification oversight umbrella. Mine was listed in the appendix. Back then, I hadn't even known. Now I understood. Karen had been planning this for months, maybe longer. I wasn't a target of opportunity. I was a piece on her board, and she'd assumed I wouldn't fight back. Too bad for her. Carol and I doubled down. She filed a formal motion for an emergency injunction in county court to block any further HOA action regarding my property, including media use, flyers, or zoning applications. We attached the binder, the forged documents, the footage, the audio, and the emails. It was a heavy packet. Meanwhile, I took a different approach. Neighbors. I visited Susan again, then 2 more property owners along the shore. One of them, Marcus, a retired electrician, invited me in and showed me something jaw-dropping. A notarized community inclusion agreement with his forged signature and a fabricated notarization stamp. He hadn't signed it. The notary listed on the document had died in 2019. We scanned it, added it to the growing file, and Carol requested a forensic handwriting expert to compare signatures across all affected properties. I also installed a new layer of cameras, this time outward-facing. One caught a figure at dusk attempting to remove my "Not for Rent" sign and replace it with a freshly printed "Shoreview Guest Access" placard. I confronted him. It was Joel again, the same HOA security guard who'd broken in the first time. I stepped into the light with a camera in hand and said, "You're being recorded." Walk away he did, fast, but the footage was gold. Carol compiled a highlight reel and emailed it to the local news desk under the subject line, HOA overreach or organized land theft. 2 days later, the station aired a story titled Homeowner Battles Rogue HOA, Hidden Cameras Reveal Break-In, and Forgery Plot. It went viral by the morning. I was fielding phone calls from reporters, local politicians, even a senator's office. Turns out the issue of overreaching HOAs had been quietly building across the state. My case was just flashy enough and just well-documented enough to become the face of it. By the end of the week, Shoreview Haven held an emergency board meeting. I wasn't invited, obviously, but someone leaked the agenda. Karen was under internal review. 3 other board members were pushing for her resignation. The cherry on top, an anonymous envelope landed in my mailbox the next day. Inside, printed screenshots of Karen's direct messages to board members discussing fast-tracking annexation and getting Garrett out of the picture. One message read, "He's just a retired lab rat. No one will believe him if we keep it clean." I stapled them together and mailed them to the district attorney. The same night, I saw a car parked across the street with no plates, lights off, just idling. I stepped out with my phone flashlight, camera rolling. The car peeled off. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was war. The morning Karen finally snapped, I wasn't surprised. I'd seen enough guilty people cornered during my career to know that when the walls close in, they don't go quiet. They go loud. It started with a knock on the door. Not police, not neighbors. A man in a suit, mid-50s, accompanied by a younger woman holding a clipboard. They introduced themselves as special compliance agents from Shoreview Haven's Property Oversight Task Force. No joke, those were their actual words. "We're here to conduct a courtesy review of shoreline conformity standards," the man said, already reaching for his badge. I didn't even look at it. "This property isn't in your jurisdiction," I said flatly. "You're trespassing." "We've received updated documents," he replied with an oily smile. "Your recent HOA accession request was approved." I stared. "My what?" The woman flipped through her clipboard and held out a printed PDF, complete with my name, signature, and date. My real signature, except I hadn't signed it. I took it from her, studied the ink, scanned the alignment. Whoever forged this had gotten smart. They'd lifted an actual signature from my old insurance documents and digitally embedded it. This wasn't amateur work anymore. I didn't say a word, just stepped back, held up my phone, and began filming. "You're being recorded," I said. "This is fraudulent documentation. I suggest you leave immediately." The man's smile faltered. "We'll return with proper enforcement," he muttered, and the two walked off. I sent the footage to Carol, who was already preparing filings for federal wire fraud and document tampering. Then I sent it to the same reporter who had broken the previous story. By noon, it was online under the headline, "Forged HOA Docs Used to Seize Private Property? Former Forensics Expert Fights Back." This time, it wasn't just viral. It exploded radio, cable news. A podcast even dubbed it the HOA coup attempt. By evening, the county prosecutor's office had issued a subpoena for Shoreview Haven's internal communications and financial records. And Karen, she did exactly what I feared she might. She called the police, reported a dangerous man on her street, claimed I was armed, unstable, and threatening HOA staff. 3 patrol cars showed up, guns drawn. I kept calm, walked out slowly, empty hands, showed them the footage. Showed them the deed, showed them the restraining order that Carol had filed just 2 days earlier, naming Karen Bates directly. The senior officer took one look at the paperwork, then turned to his men and said, "Stand down." That night, I watched from the porch as 2 unmarked cruisers rolled up to the HOA office, Karen's house. She didn't come out at first. Then finally, in a long beige cardigan and house slippers, she emerged, escorted to the car without handcuffs, but with her face pale and tight. They didn't arrest her yet, but it was coming. Joel was already in custody, and the emails, DMs, forged permits, and fake signatures were piling up. The next morning, a district judge granted Carol's full injunction. The HOA was officially barred from entering or communicating with me directly, filing any documents in my name, representing my property in any capacity, attempting any form of land or zoning claims involving my parcel that wasn't just a win. That was checkmate. And yet, the war hadn't ended. Not fully, because as we began combing through the subpoenaed records, documents from the HOA's cloud storage, something surfaced. A list. A long one. Private homeowners all along the coast. Notes beside each name. Likely target. Elderly. Absentee. Estate pending. Unprotected title. They'd been mapping this for years. I wasn't the first, but I damn well intended to be the last. I arrived at the courthouse in a charcoal suit I hadn't worn since testifying in a triple burglary case 7 years back. Funny how things come full circle. Back then, I was the guy explaining how to catch people like Karen. Now I was the one doing it. The courtroom was packed. Locals, press, even a couple from out of town who'd driven in just to see the show. Karen sat across from me, her face powdered, her posture rigid. She still thought she could win this. Still thought her HOA shield, her money, her fake documents would somehow hold up under pressure. But Carol brought the fire. She opened with the hidden camera footage, the night Joel picked my lock and entered with Karen at his back. Then came the forged agreements, the fake notary, the conflicting GPS boundaries on the manipulated plat maps, and finally, the smoking gun. Karen's messages to board members sent from her own account. When Joel took the stand, he looked like a man dragging a cinder block behind him. He didn't lie. He said Karen told him the house was abandoned and that I had verbally agreed to make it available for special events. He admitted she gave him the copied key. He admitted she gave him a script in case police arrived. The script said I was unstable, possibly paranoid, and had a record, which was a flat-out lie. Then came the handwriting expert. Then the digital forensics guy. Then Marcus, my neighbor with the fake notary stamp. By the third hour, Karen's lawyer had stopped objecting. By the fifth, the jury looked like they were watching a bad movie unfold in real time. The judge called a break. Karen stood and tried to leave the room, but was intercepted by 2 deputies. Not arrested, but watched closely. When court resumed, Carol delivered her final statement that this wasn't a property dispute, but a coordinated campaign of fraud, intimidation, and unlawful seizure, executed under the guise of HOA procedure. A private mafia, dressed in polos and hiding behind architectural guidelines. The verdict came back before lunch the next day. Guilty on all counts. Falsification of legal documents, trespassing, attempted property theft, filing fraudulent zoning applications, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, false report to law enforcement. Karen Bates received 10 years. No parole for the first 5. Joel got 2.5 for breaking and entering, but testified in full, so he got some leniency. Shoreview Haven HOA was placed under direct county oversight, pending a forensic audit. Several board members resigned the same afternoon. The HOA was also ordered to pay $250,000 in damages to me, full reimbursement for legal and security costs, a public apology printed in 3 regional newspapers. But I didn't stop there. I bought the adjacent lot from an old couple who said they'd never trust the HOA again. I added floodlights, new fencing, another camera array. I reinforced the gate, updated the perimeter software, and tied every sensor to a cloud backup. And then I added a plaque to my front door. Black slate. Sand-blasted text. Simple and clear. No trespassing. Not a member. Not for rent. If you're from the HOA, walk away. You've tried before. The local paper ran a photo of it with the headline, "The Man Who Beat the HOA Mafia." I didn't need applause. I didn't need fame. I just needed one thing: silence. And for the first time in months, I got it.